It was a cold morning in Los Angeles, the kind that cuts through your jacket, settles in your bones, and makes you wonder if you'll ever truly feel warm again. The city was waking up, the streets beginning to buzz with the usual frenetic energy. But amidst the chaos, on a corner near the hustle of downtown, a woman sat alone, her tattered coat hugging her frail form. Her name was Sarah, but to the world around her, she was just another face, another figure that disappeared into the background of the city's endless tide of commuters and tourists. Sarah had lived on the streets for 3 years, long enough for the rain to have washed away much of the person she used to be. In the early days, she'd hoped things would change, that someone would notice her, that help would come. But over time, the hope had dulled into a quiet acceptance of the life she had. Most people just walked past her, avoiding eye contact, pretending she wasn't there. They didn't stop to ask what had brought her to this place, nor did they care. But on this particular day, Sarah had a plan. She had never been one to dream of grand gestures, but this morning, she had a strange sense that something was different. Maybe it was the way the light fell on the street, or the way the traffic seemed to slow, but Sarah felt something inside stir, a flicker of hope. She wasn't asking for much, just a chance, a moment to make her voice heard. With shaky hands, she pulled out a weathered piece of cardboard and began to write. In uneven letters, she scrawled a simple message. "Please help. Elon Musk, can you help me?" The irony wasn't lost on her. Asking for help from someone like Elon Musk, the billionaire tech mogul, felt ridiculous. But in that quiet moment, with the weight of the world pressing down on her, she didn't care. She just needed someone, anyone, to notice. As Sarah sat there, holding the sign, she didn't know that in just a few hours, her life would change forever. That one simple message, sent into the void of the internet, would set off a chain of events that no one could have predicted. The morning had dragged on, and Sarah was beginning to feel the familiar sting of hopelessness creep in. People walked by without a second glance, their eyes skimming over her as if she were just another piece of urban scenery. The few coins that had clinked into her cup were barely enough to get by, and the possibility of a warm meal seemed more like a fantasy with every passing hour. She had tried everything: local shelters, food banks, and government assistance. But each attempt felt more like a dead end. Even the smallest glimmer of help never seemed to last long. It was when she was about to roll up her sign and call it a day that something strange happened. A car slowed to a stop in front of her. The driver, a middle-aged man with graying hair and kind eyes, looked at her with a mixture of concern and curiosity. He hesitated for a moment, as if weighing whether he should approach, before opening the door. "Hey, you, are you all right?" he asked softly. Sarah blinked in surprise. Most people didn't stop. They either ignored her completely or gave her a quick glance of disdain before moving on. But this man, he wasn't rushing. He wasn't making assumptions. He was just asking. I'm fine," Sarah said, though the words felt hollow as they left her mouth. She hadn't felt fine in years, but she didn't know how to explain it, didn't know how to put into words the mountain of loneliness and defeat she had been carrying for so long. The man didn't look convinced. He stepped closer, peering at her sign. "Elon Musk?" he asked, his brow furrowing. "You want to reach out to him?" Sarah looked down at her sign. The words she had written felt even more absurd in the light of the man's question, but she nodded anyway. I just thought maybe he might see it," she muttered, unsure of why she was sharing her crazy thought with a stranger. "He's always in the news. Maybe he could help. I don't know." The man smiled gently, kneeling down beside her. "I can't promise anything, but I'm going to help you." He pulled out his phone, his fingers moving quickly over the screen. For a moment, Sarah thought he was just another person who would take a picture of her misery and walk away. But then, the man showed her what he had done. He had taken a photo of her with the sign, and in the caption, he wrote, "Sarah, a homeless woman asking Elon Musk for help. If anyone can make a difference, It's him. Let's see if we can get this to him. He hit post, and in that moment, Sarah's heart skipped a beat. The man wasn't just offering a few coins or a meal. He was giving her something bigger. He was giving her a shot at being seen, at being heard. His name was Ben. He was a freelance journalist, constantly chasing stories, but never truly finding one that meant something to him. Something about Sarah's quiet desperation struck a chord deep within him, and he found himself not just snapping the picture but taking action. In those few seconds, as he hit the send button, a rush of hope surged through Sarah. She hadn't been seen by anyone for so long, but now, someone, somewhere, would know her name. "You did it," she said, her voice barely a whisper, trembling with emotion. "You really did it." Ben nodded, his smile wide and reassuring. "We'll see what happens, all right. But at least now, you've got a chance." Little did they know that the image of Sarah and her sign would spread like wildfire, igniting a chain reaction that neither of them could have predicted. As the post gained traction, the catalyst for Sarah's transformation into something she had never dreamed of, a symbol of hope, a viral sensation, was already taking shape. The next few days were a blur for Sarah. Ben had kept in touch, offering her small doses of hope and practical support, bringing her meals, making sure she was safe, checking in on her every few hours. And in return, Sarah's life, once so isolated, was now filled with a strange mix of anxiety and excitement. She had no idea how far the post had traveled, but every time she checked Ben's phone, the likes, comments, and shares seemed to multiply at an impossibly fast rate. At first, Sarah had felt a rush of something she hadn't felt in years: hope. The idea that Elon Musk, or anyone for that matter, could see her, could hear her plea, filled her with a sense of urgency. She began to believe that maybe, just maybe, the world wasn't as indifferent as it seemed. But as the days went by, that initial burst of excitement started to fade into something much more complex. Fear. The comments started flooding in, some supportive, some dismissive, and others cruel. "She's just another scammer trying to get attention," one read. "Get a job, lady," said another. Each message stung, and Sarah found herself constantly questioning whether she'd made the right decision. She had never wanted to be a spectacle, never wanted to be this vulnerable. The world had already shown her how cruel it could be to people like her, and now she was exposed in a way that felt unbearable. Ben, noticing her growing anxiety, sat down beside her one evening, his voice soft but determined. "Sarah, I know this is overwhelming, but you're not alone in this. You can't let the negativity drown out what this could mean for you. We've got a chance here. You've got a chance here." His words were meant to reassure, but all Sarah could hear was the pounding doubt in her head. What if this wasn't the help I needed? What if this only makes things worse? She had seen how people could twist her vulnerability, mock her, and then walk away. What if Elon Musk saw her as just another charity case, a blip on his radar that was quickly forgotten? What if this was all just a fleeting moment of attention that would vanish as fast as it had come? That night, as Sarah lay on the concrete sidewalk wrapped in her threadbare blanket, the weight of it all pressed down on her chest. The world was watching her. The world knew her name, but it didn't know her pain. No one could understand what it was like to be forgotten, to be invisible, to carry every ounce of shame and sorrow with no one to share it with. The pressure was suffocating. The next day, a notification pinged on Ben's phone, jolting Sarah from her thoughts. It was a tweet from none other than Elon Musk himself. The message was brief, and yet it sent a shiver of disbelief through Sarah's entire being. "I see you, Sarah. We'll figure this out." Ben showed it to Sarah, his eyes wide with astonishment. This is it, Sarah. This is the moment." But instead of feeling elation, Sarah felt an overwhelming sense of panic. What now? She wasn't ready for this. She didn't know how to navigate the world that was opening up for her. Her mind raced with questions. Was this real? Was this truly happening? And if it was, would she be able to stand up to the expectations that were suddenly being placed on her? Could she handle this, or was it too much too soon? She stood up abruptly, backing away from Ben, her eyes wide with fear. I can't do this. I didn't sign up for this. Ben reached out, his voice soft but insistent. Sarah, you've already done it. Now you have to choose whether you're going to run from it or embrace it. This is your chance. But the fear of failing, of letting people down, of being exposed, almost paralyzed her. It wasn't just about getting help anymore. It was about facing the world she had once thought she could hide from forever. The tweet, like an open door, invited Sarah into a world she wasn't sure she was ready for. And yet, as the weight of that uncertainty hung over her, she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't go back. Not anymore. The world was watching. And whatever happened next, she had to be ready to step into the light. The following days felt like an emotional roller coaster for Sarah. The tweet from Elon Musk had exploded across the internet. And soon, news outlets were picking up the story. Interviews, hashtags, and endless messages flooded Ben's phone, each one more overwhelming than the last. The world had caught its breath, waiting for Sarah's next move. The spotlight was no longer just on her plight. It was on her future, on what she was going to do with this strange gift of attention that had been thrust upon her. At first, Sarah tried to ignore the pressure. She told herself she wasn't ready, that it wasn't her moment, that she was still the same woman who had lost everything and lived in the shadows. But as the messages poured in, her heart began to race. The world was watching her now, not as an invisible face in the crowd, but as a symbol of possibility, a beacon for change. It wasn't just about the tweet anymore. It was about the lives that were starting to take an interest in her story, the lives that were touched by her plea for help. And yet, the longer she sat in this moment, the more uncertain she became. Late one night, after a long day of interviews and public attention, Ben came to her with some startling news. Elon Musk's team wants to meet you, Ben said, his voice quiet but tinged with excitement. They've reached out. They want to talk about how they can help you and others in similar situations. Sarah froze. She had imagined this moment so many times, but never did it feel real. She had dreamed of someone, anyone, offering her a lifeline. But this was beyond what she could have ever conceived. And yet, as Ben spoke, Sarah felt a knot tightening in her stomach. She wasn't sure whether it was excitement or fear. I don't know if I can do this, Ben, Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. What if they don't really care? What if they only want to use me for publicity? Ben sat down beside her, his eyes serious. Sarah, no one is forcing you to do this, but you have a chance to change things, not just for you, but for so many others. This is your moment. Don't let the fear control you. This could be real. Sarah bit her lip, unsure. Her mind was a whirlwind of doubt. She had spent so many years feeling invisible, discarded by society, and now, in the blink of an eye, she was thrust into the spotlight. The weight of it all felt suffocating. Could she handle the responsibility? Could she trust that Elon Musk's involvement wasn't just a fleeting gesture, a PR stunt to make him look good? Could she really believe that someone so far removed from her world would truly understand the depth of her pain? But then something inside her shifted, just enough to allow the possibility of change to take root. She thought about the days she had spent on the streets, the hopelessness that had swallowed her whole. She thought about the countless people who had passed her by without a second glance, and suddenly, a small spark of something unexpected flickered to life. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about giving voice to the voiceless, about showing the world that change was possible, even for someone like her. I'm scared, Sarah admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. But I'm going to do it. I'm going to meet with them. Ben's face softened, a proud smile breaking through the tension. You've got this, Sarah. The decision, though daunting, marked a profound shift for Sarah. She wasn't just the woman with a cardboard sign anymore. She was someone with a story that mattered. And no matter how terrified she felt, she realized this was her chance, not just to escape her past, but to rewrite her future. As the date for the meeting drew closer, the pressure intensified. But instead of running from it, Sarah embraced it. The fear was still there, but it was no longer paralyzing. It had become a driving force, propelling her towards something bigger than she had ever imagined. The day of the meeting arrived, and Sarah's nerves felt like an electrical current running through her veins. She had never been in a situation like this before, never stood in front of people who saw her not as a charity case, but as someone with potential, someone whose story could spark change. The meeting wasn't just a chance to change her life. It was a chance to change the lives of so many others who had been overlooked, ignored, and forgotten, just like she had been for so long. Ben had arranged for the meeting to take place in a sleek, modern office downtown, far removed from the gritty streets Sarah had called home. When she arrived, she was immediately struck by the contrast. The glass walls, the polished floors, the air of success and power that permeated every corner of the room. It felt foreign, out of reach, like a world she had no business entering. But when the door opened and Elon Musk himself walked in, all of that faded away. He was tall, his presence commanding yet strangely approachable, his face a mix of curiosity and warmth. His reputation as a tech mogul, a visionary, preceded him, but in that moment, he wasn't just the face of billion-dollar companies. He was a person who had seen her story, who had reached out, and who was about to sit across from her, ready to listen. "Sarah," he said, his voice calm but filled with an urgency that made her heart race. "I've read your story. I've seen the incredible strength you've shown to survive. But now, I want to know how we can help." The words hit her like a wave, crashing over her in a mixture of disbelief and awe. Here she was, sitting in front of the man she never thought would give her a second glance, let alone ask how he could help. And yet, despite the magnitude of the moment, Sarah felt the walls she had carefully built around herself start to crack. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time: hope. But then, just as quickly as the hope surged, the doubts crept back in. What if this isn't real? What if this is just another rich person with a grand idea, but no real understanding of what it means to struggle? Sarah took a deep breath and forced herself to speak, her voice unsteady but strong. "I don't know what to ask for. I don't know what kind of help I need. I've spent so long just surviving. I don't even know what it's like to dream anymore." Elon listened, his gaze steady and compassionate. "Sometimes it's hard to ask for help because we don't know how to. But that's why I'm here, to help you rediscover that dream. Whether it's housing, education, or even a new opportunity, we'll make sure you're not alone in this." The weight of his words hit her harder than she anticipated. For the first time in years, Sarah felt the stirrings of something new, something unfamiliar. She wasn't just a victim of circumstance anymore. She was a person with the power to decide her future. But the emotional peak wasn't just in the words spoken, it was in the silent understanding that passed between them. Elon wasn't promising a quick fix. He wasn't offering to wave a magic wand and erase her past. But what he was offering was a partnership, a commitment to helping her and others like her, a real chance for change. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of release. She realized then that asking for help wasn't a sign of weakness, it was a sign of strength. And as the conversation continued, Sarah felt the heavy chains of isolation and hopelessness start to lift. When the meeting ended, Elon's team didn't just promise assistance, they began to take immediate action. A plan was set in motion. A home, access to education, a job program designed specifically for people like Sarah, who had been left behind by society. As Sarah walked out of that office, her heart felt lighter than it had in years. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt ready to face it head-on. The world had changed for her, but more importantly, she had changed for herself. The moment she had been waiting for had arrived, and she was no longer invisible. The weeks that followed the meeting with Elon Musk felt like a whirlwind, but for Sarah, each day brought new steps forward into a life she hadn't even dared to dream about. Elon's team had followed through on their promises, providing her with a safe, warm place to live and enrolling her in programs that would give her the education and skills she needed to build a new future. It wasn't just about material things. It was about dignity, empowerment, and the opportunity to start again. Sarah often found herself reflecting on how far she had come. Just months before, she had been sitting on the cold streets, holding a sign with the name of one of the world's most famous billionaires on it. She had been invisible, forgotten, a face in the crowd. But now, she was surrounded by people who believed in her potential, who saw her not as a charity case, but as someone capable of greatness. But it wasn't just the tangible changes in her life that made a difference. It was the transformation within herself. Sarah had spent so many years hiding, suppressing her dreams, believing that she was too broken to be fixed. The journey had taught her that it wasn't the circumstances that defined her, but how she chose to face them. She was more than her past. She was more than her struggles. One afternoon, Ben came to visit her at her new apartment. She greeted him with a smile, though it was a smile that carried a depth of gratitude neither of them had ever shared before. "You did it, Sarah," Ben said, his voice full of pride. "You really did it." Sarah nodded, looking around at the small but cozy space that had become her new home. It was simple, but it was hers. And for the first time in years, she felt at peace. "I couldn't have done it without you," she replied, her eyes brimming with emotion. "You gave me the chance to be seen, to be heard." Ben chuckled softly, shaking his head. "No, you gave yourself that chance. You were the one who decided to take it." As Sarah stood by the window, watching the sun set over the city, she realized that the world had changed not because someone else had made it happen, but because she had chosen to step into it. And with that, she understood something powerful, that even in a world that sometimes seemed indifferent, the greatest change often begins with a single courageous step. The story was never just about asking for help. It was about reclaiming the power to change your own destiny. As Sarah looked out at the skyline, she knew one thing for certain. The rest of her life had just begun.